18. The Constitutional Revolution, Dawn of Modern Politics. By the late 19th century, Iran was formally independent, yet economically dominated by Russia and Britain. Concessions granted to foreign companies over tobacco, railways, and oil angered merchants, clerics, and intellectuals. The Tobacco Protest, 1891. A nationwide boycott against a British tobacco monopoly showed the power of popular mobilization and the alliance between the bazaar and the clergy. It became a rehearsal for greater change. Revolution of 1906. Demonstrations in Tehran forced Muzaffar al-Din Shah to accept a constitution and establish the Majlis, parliament, the first of its kind in the Islamic world. The movement demanded rule of law, limits on royal power, national control of resources. Although Russian intervention and internal divisions weakened the experiment, the idea of constitutional government never disappeared. 19. Rise of the Pahlavi state. Reza Shah, 1925 to 1941. Out of post-World War I chaos emerged the strongman Reza Khan, who crowned himself Reza Shah Pahlavi. His program resembled earlier reforming monarchs such as Darius or Abbas: creation of a national army, secular schools and universities, railways linking north and south, promotion of nationalism and pre-Islamic heritage, limitation of tribal and clerical power. He renamed the country Iran in international usage and celebrated the legacy of Cyrus and Persepolis. Yet authoritarian methods and suppression of dissent planted future resentments. Mohammad Reza Shah, 1941 to 1979. During World War II, Allied forces occupied Iran, forcing Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his son. Oil and nationalism. Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the British-controlled oil industry in 1951, becoming a hero across the developing world. In 1953, a coup backed by the CIA and MI6 restored the Shah's authority, a turning point that shaped Iranian distrust of the West. The White Revolution. The Shah launched rapid modernization, land reform, women's suffrage, industrial expansion, literacy campaigns. Economic growth was real, but inequality, political repression by the Savak security service, and cultural westernization alienated many groups. 20. The Islamic Revolution of 1979. A broad coalition, clerics, leftists, students, and merchants rose against the monarchy. Led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the movement combined religious symbolism with anti-imperialist rhetoric. In February 1979, the Pahlavi dynasty collapsed. A referendum created the Islamic Republic, introducing a new system based on the doctrine of velayat-e-faqih, guardianship of the jurist, elected institutions alongside clerical oversight, and emphasis on social justice and independence from superpowers. The revolution was as transformative for the region as the rise of the Safavids centuries earlier. 21. War and Reconstruction. Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. Saddam Hussein's invasion sought to exploit revolutionary turmoil. The 8-year conflict became one of the longest conventional wars of the 20th century. Trench warfare reminiscent of World War I, missile attacks on cities, use of chemical weapons by Iraq. Iran defended its territory at enormous human cost, forging a powerful sense of national solidarity. Post-war era. Presidents Rafsanjani and Khatami pursued reconstruction and limited reforms, encouraging civil society and dialogue with the world. Conservatives and reformists competed within the unique political system. 22. Iran in the 21st century. Nuclear dispute and sanctions. International concern over Iran's nuclear program led to years of sanctions. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Action Plan, JCPOA, temporarily eased tensions, though later withdrawals and renewed sanctions revived economic hardship. Society and culture today. Modern Iran is a country of striking contrasts: a young, highly educated population, world-class filmmakers, scientists, and artists, ancient traditions alive beside digital modernity, continuing debates over religion, identity, and freedom. The Persian language remains a bridge across Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, while poets like Hafez and Rumi are still memorized in homes. 23. The long echo of empire. Looking back across 2,500 years, several enduring patterns appear. Central authority and local diversity, from Achaemenid satrapies to modern provinces, Iran has balanced unity with pluralism. Cultural resilience. Conquerors from Arabs to Mongols were absorbed rather than absorbing Persia. Strategic geography. Positioned between East and West, Iran has always been a crossroads of trade and conflict. Moral vision of kingship. The ancient ideal of justice continues to influence political expectations. 24. Conclusion. Persia beyond time. The Persian Empire was never a single moment. It was a conversation across centuries, from Cyrus to Khomeini, from Zoroastrian priests to Islamic philosophers, from caravan routes to oil pipelines. Empires of sword vanished, yet the empire of culture endured. Gardens planted at Pasargada inspired those of Isfahan. Sasanian ideas shaped Abbasid Baghdad. Safavid art colored Mughal India. Even modern debates about law, faith, and identity echo questions asked in Persepolis long ago. To study Persia is to witness how a civilization survives every catastrophe by reinventing itself. The banners changed, the capitals moved, but the deeper current, language, memory, and passion for beauty continued to flow. The history of the Persian Empire, therefore, is not only the past of one nation, it is a chapter in the story of humanity. Proof that cultures, like the phoenix of Iranian legend, can rise again and again from their own ashes, carrying the light of ancient wisdom into new ages. Civilization, ideas, and the Persian contribution to the world. The earlier chapters traced the political story of Persia from Cyrus the Great to contemporary Iran, but an empire is more than borders and battles. This part explores the deeper contributions, ideas, sciences, arts, and institutions through which Persian civilization shaped the wider world. 25. The Persian idea of kingship. Long before modern concepts of governance, Persian rulers developed a theory of authority based on justice rather than terror. The concept of asha, truth and order. Achaemenid inscriptions describe the king as guardian of asha, cosmic truth and balance. Unlike many ancient empires, legitimacy was tied to protection of the weak, fair taxation, respect for local traditions, and harmony between peoples. This vision influenced later Islamic political thought and even medieval European ideas of the just king. Law above power. Darius the Great boasted not merely of conquest, but of establishing laws so that the strong may not strike the weak. The empire's multi-ethnic courts allowed Babylonians, Egyptians, Jews, and Greeks to live by their own customs, an early model of legal pluralism. 26. Networks that connected the ancient world. Roads and communication. The Royal Road, stretching over 2,500 kilometers, enabled messages to travel from Anatolia to Iran in days. Mounted couriers, inns, and standardized checkpoints created the first truly international postal system. Trade and economy. Persia linked Indian spices and gems, Central Asian horses, Mesopotamian grain, Mediterranean silver. The gold derrick became a trusted currency from the Aegean to the Indus, proving that economic integration could accompany cultural diversity. 27. Science and knowledge. Medicine. From the Academy of Gundeshapur and Sasanian times to Islamic-era hospitals, Persian physicians led the world. Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, wrote the Canon of Medicine, used in Europe for 600 years. Hospitals employed clinical observation, pharmacies, and medical ethics codes. Mathematics and astronomy. Al-Khwarizmi, working in Baghdad's Persian milieu, developed algebra and algorithms. Omar Khayyam calculated a solar calendar more accurate than the later Gregorian. Timurid observations in Samarkand mapped the stars with remarkable precision. Philosophy. Persian thinkers served as bridges between Greece, India, and the Islamic world. The works of Plato and Aristotle survived largely through translations sponsored by Persian patrons. 28. Poetry, the soul of Persia. No civilization placed greater value on poetry. Ferdowsi preserved national memory in the Shahnameh. Rumi spoke of universal love beyond creed. Hafiz explored the mystery of the human heart. Saadi wrote the Gulistan, teaching ethics through elegant stories. These poets influenced Ottoman Turkey, Mughal India, and even European romantics like Goethe and Emerson. Persian became the language of refinement across half of Asia. 29. Art, architecture, and the image of paradise. The Persian garden. The word paradise comes from Old Persian pairidis,
the ending that was never written. Long after the war ended, the world moved on. Cities were rebuilt. Borders were redrawn. New generations grew up without knowing the fear of occupation. In the man at the center of this story, he blended back into ordinary life. No interviews, no medals on display, no recognition from strangers. To most people, he was just another face in the crowd. But inside him lived memories of moments when everything could have ended, and didn't. What war really leaves behind. War doesn't just leave ruins on maps. It leaves quiet survivors. People who learned how fragile control really is. People who saw how quickly power collapses when belief disappears. People who understand that strength means nothing without resolve. This man carried those lessons for the rest of his life. He rarely spoke about what happened, and when he did, he never called himself brave. He simply said he did what he had to do. Why this story still matters? Because the world still believes the same lie, that power is permanent, that control is absolute, that once someone is defeated, their story is over. History proves otherwise. Again and again, it shows us that underestimating people is dangerous, especially in moments when they appear weakest. That mistake has been made before, and it will be made again. The final truth. They thought he was finished. They were wrong. Not because he was the strongest, not because he was the loudest, but because he refused to accept the ending written for him. And as long as even one person refuses to give up, no victory is ever complete, and no defeat is ever final. Closing line, perfect for fade out. Wars are remembered for their battles. History is changed by those who refuse to disappear. The stories we never count. When wars are written into history books, they are reduced to dates, maps, and outcomes. Millions become statistics, decisions become paragraphs, suffering becomes footnotes. But wars are not lived in textbooks. They are lived by individuals, by moments where someone is pushed to the edge and must decide who they really are. This man was one of those moments. Why so many stories end too early? Most people assume that when someone is captured, injured, or isolated, their role in history is over. That survival itself is the ending. But survival is not passive. Survival is active. It requires thinking, patience, restraint, and timing. It requires choosing hope when fear is the logical response. This is why his story matters, not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. The invisible impact. No official record ever measured the effect of his actions. No document can tell us how many decisions were delayed, how many mistakes were made, how many lives were indirectly saved because confusion spread where certainty once existed. But historians agree on one thing. Wars don't collapse from one blow. They collapse from thousands of small fractures. And he was one of those fractures. A pattern repeated in history. This is not the only time history has followed this pattern. Empires fall not when they are weakest,
but when they believe they are untouchable. They stop questioning, they stop listening, they stop noticing the quiet resistance. That is always the beginning of the end. What this means today. This story is not just about World War II. It's about power, about arrogance, about what happens when people are underestimated. The world still repeats these mistakes again and again, which is why stories like this must be told, even when they don't fit neatly into headlines. When silence becomes the loudest proof. After everything he survived, what stayed with him was not fear, but silence. Silence after explosions, silence after shouting, silence after realizing he was still alive when others were not. That silence followed him long after the war ended. People assumed survival meant peace. It didn't. Survival meant remembering. The weight of being misjudged. He often thought about how easily he had been dismissed, not as a threat, not as important, not as someone worth watching. That misjudgment saved him, and it revealed something dangerous about power. Those who believe they have total control stop paying attention to the quiet ones. History shows this again and again. The biggest failures rarely come from strong enemies, they come from underestimated ones. The difference between defeat and endurance. Defeat is visible, endurance is quiet. This man endured hunger, fear, isolation, and uncertainty, not because he believed he would become a hero, but because giving up felt worse than continuing. He did not fight every day. He did not win every moment, but he kept going, and sometimes that is enough to change outcomes. What history chooses to remember. History remembers victory parades. It remembers speeches and flags, but it rarely remembers restraint, patience, observation. It rarely remembers the people who waited and acted only when it mattered most. This story exists to correct that imbalance. A final layer of meaning. They thought he was finished because they believed weakness is permanent. They were wrong. Weakness can be temporary. Resolve can be permanent. And when resolve outlasts power, power eventually collapses. The long road after escape. After everything he survived, life did not suddenly become easier. Escape did not mean safety. Freedom did not mean peace. For weeks, sometimes months, he lived with constant uncertainty. He moved through forests, villages, and ruined roads where every sound could be danger. Hunger was normal. Sleep was a risk. The war was still everywhere. He learned to measure time differently, not by days, but by moments of safety. A quiet hour, a trusted face, a door that stayed closed when footsteps passed by. These small victories kept him alive. Trust was the rarest resource. One of the hardest lessons he learned was this: not everyone could be trusted. Some people helped out of courage, others helped out of fear. Some pretended to help while planning betrayal. He had to read people quickly, their eyes, their pauses, their tone of voice. A single wrong judgment could end everything. So he became careful, quiet, observant. The same traits that had kept him alive as a prisoner now protected him in freedom. How ordinary people became part of the story. What surprised him most was who helped him. Not soldiers, not leaders, ordinary civilians. Farmers who shared food they barely had. Families who hid strangers knowing the risk. Messengers who carried words without knowing their meaning. These people never saw themselves as heroes. They simply refused to look away. And without them, survival would have been impossible. The mental war. The enemy still believed in control. They believed checkpoints, patrols, and fear were enough. But something subtle was happening. Information was slipping through. Movements were being observed. Patterns were being learned. Even without direct combat, the balance was shifting. Because war is not only fought with weapons, it is fought with awareness. and awareness was spreading where fear once lived. When the body weakens but the mind sharpens. Physically, he was exhausted, weight lost, strength reduced, injuries never fully healed, but mentally he was sharper than ever. He understood routines, he understood pressure, he understood that people under stress repeat mistakes. That understanding became his advantage. He no longer rushed decisions, he waited, and waiting in war can be more powerful than action. Moments that nearly ended everything. There were times he came terrifyingly close to capture, a patrol turning a corner too early, a knock on the wrong door, a question asked 1 second too long. Each time, survival depended on calm. No sudden movements, no panic, just stillness. Later, he would realize how thin the line had been, how easily the story could have ended there. Why this part of the story matters. This phase of his journey is rarely told because it lacks drama. No explosions, no speeches, no clear victories. But this is where most courage exists, in endurance, in restraint, in continuing when no one is watching. This is the part of war that breaks most people. It did not break him. Setting up the final meaning. By the time the war began to turn decisively, his role was nearly complete. Not because he was no longer needed, but because what he represented had already spread. The belief that control was not absolute, that fear could be navigated, that being underestimated could be turned into strength. They thought he was finished. What they never understood was this: he had only changed form.